Now been made official. The Texas A&M Aggies crowned as the #1 recruiting class of all time, along with obviously being the #1 recruiting class of this cycle. There you see the belt, and you know what? I'm just going to pretend it's not Photoshop. I'm going to pretend Jimbo Fisher genuinely posed for that photo. 328.59. Andrew Ivins, when you look at that number, you think what?
They better be playing for a national title here soon, right? or we're ranking these guys wrong, and Texas A&M is scouting them wrong. No, these are blue chip guys. I said it earlier on the show when I was in Orlando. There was 15 or so Texas A&M signings. It felt like a Texas A&M practice. They got a ton of talent, and it starts right there in the trenches. Look at that defensive line group: Walter Nolan, Shamar Stewart, Gabe Brownlow-Dinley. We haven't even mentioned him today on the show. I mean, he's a freak athlete. I've compared him to Ed Oliver. You want to talk about a player comp for Shamar Stewart? How about Chris Jones in the NFL? We saw him with the Kansas City Chiefs making plays. I think Shamar can have that that type of impact as well. And one more thing I want to say about Shamar Stewart: first #1 ranked player from Florida in modern history to sign with a school west of the Mississippi. Look, Texas A&M paid all that money for Jimbo Fisher so he would recruit. He just went into a place and did something else that no one else has done.
It's pretty incredible there. I mean, west of the Mississippi, there's a lot of powerhouses east of it, but you got Texas out there, you got Oklahoma out there, you got USC, you got A&M, and now A&M finally is the one who breaks through that veneer. But I'm looking at their class right now, and there's so many names we've talked about. And yet, I didn't even hear Denver Harris. Like Connor Wegman, we talked about him earlier today. We're going to have Jimbo Fisher join us in a little while. He joined us on early signing day. You guys remember as well as I do, I wanted to talk about Quinn Ewers, and he said, don't need to talk about him. I got the best quarterback in the class.
Exactly. When you talk about the best recruiting class in 24/7 sports history, you've got a lot of the best in here. This is the best defensive line haul in the country with guys like Walter Nolan, Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy, and now Shamar Stewart, Eni White, Anthony Lucas. Maybe the best receiver class in the country with Chris Marshall and Evan Stewart. You know what Jimbo Fisher thinks on the quarterback rankings and where that ranks. They got some talented defensive backs in this class too. Denver Harris, Marquise Groves Killebrew, if he can come back from a knee injury and be the player he was as a senior, he had his finest senior year as any cornerback in the country. They got Bobby Taylor in the secondary. So this class is obviously loaded across the board. But for me, beyond the defensive line, those wideouts, Chris Marshall and Evan Stewart, are going to be massive, instant impact type players for an offense. And then Jake Johnson, he's arguably the #1 tight end.
That's exactly what I was going to say. They got three blue chip tight ends. Donovan Green, there was a coach at the Under Armour All-America game, said this is an NFL guy. He can block. They got the other kid, Theodore, out of Sweden. I mean, top to bottom, these are guys that are going to be in your two deep. It's just not one position. This is how you build and fill out a roster.
Le'Veon Moss was as coveted a running back as there was in the SEC this year with Branson Robinson to go into Louisiana and land Le'Veon Moss. We didn't even talk about guys like Malik Silla and Smoke Bowie to beat Georgia, to go into Georgia and take him out of Bainbridge. And
then P.J. Williams, the offensive lineman out of Texas. I know Gabe Brooks, my guy, likes him. I see some Charles Cross in him as well. So, and Charles Cross, potential first rounder here in the upcoming NFL draft. So it's a height, weight, speed game, and they've checked a ton of boxes off in this class.
Guys in that office say Hunter Erb is a personal favorite of Jimbo Fisher, the big long-haired offensive tackle.
I think a lot of people are going to look now, and the next logical step is going to be, okay, well, all this talent means a lot of pressure on that staff. People can say whatever they want to. I don't think the staff is bothered by the pressure. Most people at that level aren't bothered by the pressure, especially when they know they've got the pieces to execute the plan, which goes back to what we talked about with Jimbo back in December, and probably revisit and circle back around when he joins us in a little while. There are simply things that they've wanted to do that he admitted they haven't been able to do that this class will now allow them to do, which makes all the difference in the world when you are dropping a random game to Mississippi State, or you drop one to Ole Miss. I mean, that's how you turn 9-3 into 12-0. I mean, if I were to ask you, Andrew Ivins, how close are they to winning the SEC? What would you say?
Right there.
Yeah.
I mean, they beat Alabama. They're right there, and Chris Marshall, Evan Stewart, I talked about him, we're mentioning the freaks in the class of 2022. I think those are vertical threats, especially Evan Stewart with his long speed, and that's just an element of Texas A&M's offense that has missed. So I think getting those two, obviously reloading on the defensive line is huge. I keep saying that, one at the point of attack, but man, they got the pieces, they got the horses, whatever cliche you want to say. To challenge,
They got the offensive line last year. They played a lot of those freshmen this year that got their teeth wet, or how do you say it, Josh? You're a man of words, but you know better than us where Texas A&M sits in the SEC. But from the way they've recruited, this is a 4th straight top 10 class. A few of them have been in the top 5. This one's number 1. You know, the trajectory of the program, as Andy said right away, is national championship contender or bust.
Well, it's really important that you just noted that, because this is not a number 1 class that came out of the blue and it's sandwiched between a bunch of trash. They've been highly rated already, so the foundation was already there. This is also not a 1st or 2nd year staff. They've been there multiple years now, so you have no question about culture, you have no question about philosophy, you don't have a question about the caliber of athlete out there already. It's not like it's being ramped up tenfold. It's just being taken up a notch or two, and that's kind of the hallmark that we see with a lot of programs that finally get over the hump that have been around for a little while.
And Jimbo loses his defensive coordinator, right? Mike Elko goes to Duke, but they bring in DJ Durkin. Me and Steve were actually texting about this a few days ago. You know, Durkin runs multiple sets. He's going to move his personnel around. I think that kind of fits with what Texas A&M has committed. You have so many defensive linemen. You got to figure out ways to get these guys on the field. So many front 7 defenders. It's going to be intriguing. I can't wait to turn on CBS 3:30 Saturdays and see what this unit looks like this year and the following year.
2:30 for some of us there, Andrew. It also, when you talk about the multiplicity defensively, does it not allow you to recruit multiple kinds of athletes? You don't get square pegged on the recruiting trail. You don't get told by opposing staffs, they run this, you play that. I mean, they come back in your house the next day and say, actually, we do both.
Now, look at the top 3 classes. There's hybrids everywhere right there. It's a positionless game, or it's becoming more. The position lines are blurring. Jahad Campbell at Alabama. You know, Smoke Bowie's a guy that Steve brought up. He can probably play all 4 spots in the secondary, maybe even inside as an inside corner. So, yeah, there's some position versatility, and I think that allows you to do a variety of different things. Bryce Anderson, another track star of an athlete that's going to be in that secondary. So it allows you to get creative. It allows you to get after the quarterback, and that's the most important thing.
And these guys wanted to play together. You know, every time Texas A&M was closing in on a defensive line commitment, I'm getting a text from Walter Nolan's dad about how excited they are. They want to be on the field together. They want to rotate. They want to be fresh. They want to be a dominant defensive line unit. And none of these guys were intimidated by the blue chippers coming in to play together. These guys became buds. They look forward to competing together. They look forward to having line 1 and line 2 rotating in and out and making havoc at 3:30 or 2:30 in the SEC.
Tell you what I think about also when you talk about the proven commodity over there in Alabama, and obviously you've got Brian Kelly doing what we figure he will do at LSU. Obviously we're talking a whole lot about Texas A&M. Life in the SEC West, you totally have to redefine it. When I talk about Arkansas, when I talk about Ole Miss and what it takes to achieve success at those programs, Arkansas went 9-4 this past year. And if I were to change nothing about that program but just drop them in another conference with a lighter schedule, you never know what that team could accomplish. They lost 4 games. Half of those losses were to the 2 participants in the national championship game. And so you can either look at this Texas A&M and you can say, oh my goodness, look at this wealth of talent they have. Or you can look and say, this is a war of attrition in the SEC West. And depth ultimately wins. I mean, Georgia and Alabama play in the national championship game, and we're talking about not only the players making plays, we're talking about how many players are missing, too. Who do you have behind those players? Finally, you know, Texas A&M gets to say another stud, no matter what position you're asking about.
And there's talent on the other side of the conference as well. Missouri, number 13 in the rankings right now. We're not seeing it on the graphic, but I mean, it depends on who your crossover games are. It's a dog-eat-dog world in the SEC.
Steve, we're looking at the overall team rankings right now. There's something very unique about this, which I didn't know until I just heard it in my ear now. This is the first time that we've had 4 teams ranked at least 300 or higher in the overall 24/7 Sports team rankings.
And when you look at my favorite stat, pound for pound, I mean, we're really talking about this Texas A&M class, and rightfully so. But Alabama has got the number 1 class, pound for pound, over 95 average ranking per commit in this cycle, and they went out and landed a bunch of difference makers. We could talk for 10 minutes about the guys that they have in this class. They have as fine a defensive line haul as anybody in the country. Went out and landed some difference makers on the offensive line. Also have arguably the top quarterback in the country in Ty Simpson. So Alabama, even though A&M has the number 1 class in the country and the number 1 class from a rating standpoint in 24/7 Sports history, pound for pound, average ranking per commit, you have Alabama in there at number 1.
When you ask what separates them or what has kept them out of the playoff picture, you can go whichever direction you want to. Does this class answer the question that ultimately lands them in that lofty a position?
Oh, my opinion, you got to get the quarterback figured out, right? We know what Jimbo thinks about Connor Wegman. Okay, and then I think, you know, Max Johnson, he's a good fill-in. Let's say, you know, that guy's won some games in the SEC before, so I think there's the right pieces in that quarterback room to contend in 22, and then certainly in 23. And then it comes down to getting difference makers, and more importantly, having depth. I think that's what Alabama, Georgia, you know, those guys, when someone goes down, it's a 4 or a 5-star recruit that's stepping up, and it takes a while to stack recruiting classes on top of each other. And I think this is going to be the one that maybe pushes and tips Texas A&M over the edge.
The way Georgia's defense looked this year, that's how we imagine Texas A&M's defense looking a year or two down the road with these guys, 3 years down the road. So for me, for Texas A&M to make that jump to hoist the crystal ball like Georgia finally was able to do this year, quarterback, obviously, are they going to elevate their play there and get some consistency from that position? But that offensive line group, you know, Bryce Foster, Reuben Fatherly, are those guys going to ultimately be high draft picks? Are those guys going to be among the best offensive line players in the country? You know, you like what you've seen from them early, but that's probably one of the question marks for Texas A&M moving forward when you're trying to find 13, 14 wins at the end of the year.
And so with that, it is official. The Texas A&M Aggies lock up the #1 class of the cycle. Not only that, Texas A&M finishes with the #1 recruiting class of all time. The belts, the hats, soak it all in. Congratulations to everyone in College Station and beyond.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.